So, how are we doing out there? Am I live? Looks like we're live on D Live. Just moved that window over there. Sorry, I'm just doing a bit of administration live. Move this window back so I can see what I'm reading. Okay, so we've got D Live and we're live on Tubes. Says we're live on YouTube. Okay, so I'm got ancient wisdom. Some of you might have watched my videos already. So I'm just gonna sort of start trying to do streams on Monday evenings if possible, around about this time. 8:30 for an hour or something. Yeah, just I think the first thing I'm going to try to do is maybe book readings of some of Stan Gooch's books. So let me just get a chat. Please enable chat here. Sorry, I'm doing all sorts of new bits. I've got Restream running. So it's telling me to activate chat somewhere else. Let's have a look. See if I can if I can't activate this Restream chat, then I'll just have to check YouTube and D Live or whatever for chats. No, can't see it working anywhere. Anyway, so it looks like we're up and running. So yeah, I'm going to try and do a stream every Monday where I'll be doing read-throughs and sort of commentary on I think I'm going to start with Total Man, because it's obviously Stan Gooch's first book. I've done a couple of read-throughs of a few of his sort of pamphlet books that he put out in the 80s, the sci-fi and fantasy titles. I've also got some short stories of Stan's that I've found, and I've got loads of different bits. I've got some audio recordings of Stan Gooch that I could sort of play and do commentary on for anybody who doesn't really know much about me or my channel. I made friends with Stan Gooch probably towards the end of his life. So he was living on his own in Wales a refugee, as he used to say. And I befriended him and used to visit him quite often. We'd talk a lot. We've done lots of recordings. Spent a lot of time together. Over the time I read through his work, we discussed a lot of his work. So I got a good insight into Stan Gooch and his ideas and what was going on behind his, what was going on behind his eyes, so to speak. We had lots of long, detailed, in-depth, personal, intellectual, whatever, spiritual, all sorts of discussions. And then they took Stan in 2010. They took Stan into hospital, which they claimed was for his own benefit, but they took him into a mental hospital because he was a bit worse for wear, living in his caravan. And within a couple of weeks, he had died in the mental hospital. So I did visit him there. And then I was tasked with emptying Stan's caravan, because the council was just going to empty it for him, and obviously they didn't really care who he was, so they would have probably just thrown everything away. And so I managed to save a lot of his personal work, books, and he didn't have much because he was living in a caravan and he'd moved around all his life. But what personal effects he did have, I managed to keep and archive. Letters, correspondences, drafts, all sorts of bits, really. Interesting books that he had read that was on his shelf, covered in soot, because he had a leaky chimney in his caravan, so everything was covered in soot and had a wonderful sooty sort of natural fire smell, which still now today, if I smell that smell, it still reminds me of Stan's caravan. So I set up a channel to try and discuss Stan's work, because he is, in my opinion, one of the geniuses of the 20th century. His ideas he was original, and original, which is rare. Obviously we see a lot of people taking work from each other and being inspired by people, and he was inspired by others. He was inspired by Jung and Karen Horney, the psychoanalyst. Lots of folklore and mythology, Robert Graves, Penelope Shuttle, and he claimed, so something that Stan claimed when, I've got no reason to disbelieve him, but he said when he was younger, he would go to the library and he would get out 3 books at a time, and by the evening he'd read all 3 books, to the point where in the end the library refused to let him have any more books. They couldn't believe that he was actually reading the books. They thought he was just playing a prank on them. But he was extremely well read, and he was also and I think this is part of the reason why he was rejected. There's lots of reasons why the establishment rejected him, but I think the major reason is that he was not afraid to talk about his experiences as a medium, as well as a psychiatrist. He was a well-researched and accredited psychiatrist, mainly working with children. But he also had another side to him, that he was a medium. Now, he didn't believe that there was disincarnate spirits coming through, talking through him. He developed part of his theory is to do with the cerebellum. So his belief was that he had tapped into his cerebellum, which was in his mind, the seat of the unconscious, and that these voices were him talking from his unconscious in a disembodied voice. That and that's what mediums are doing. So when he wrote his books, he would sit with a pen in his hand and start writing, and most of his references were in his head. He would remember all the thousands of references from all the different books that he'd read, and then once he'd finished writing a chapter, he'd then go back over it, check the references with the books that he thought they'd come from, and that was his process. The reason he stopped writing towards the end of his life was that he felt that he could no longer sit comfortably enough to be able to just channel his work. So his last couple of books are a little bit rambling, they're a little bit intellectual, they're a bit fanciful, but by then I think he'd put his major ideas out by the mid-90s, and all that was left to do was wait for his Nobel Prize, which never came. That's a little joke for me and Stan. So I've got Total Man, I believe it's a let's have a look. Yeah, I think this is a first edition of Total Man, which was signed by Stan Gooch in October the 9th, 1972, and it was published by Alan Lane. And Alan Lane was, I mean, there's a long series of events in Stan's life that that sort of, he called it the script writer. So there was events that would happen that would set him back or would prevent his work from getting into the public. And the first big one of these really was the publishing of Total Man. Now, Stan had actually been signed originally by Penguin. So Total Man would have been a Penguin book, which meant that you would have got the accolade that comes with Penguin books, you would have got the promotion that comes with Penguin books, and eventually it would have been republished as a Penguin classic and all the rest of it. Just before the book was going to be published, the publishers, one of the publishers left Penguin and created a new publishing house, and because he was the publisher from Penguin who had signed Stan up, he took Stan with him as one of his first sign up. So I think that was Wildwood House, I believe, was the publisher that came from Penguin. And so the first hurdle to getting his work out was that it was meant to be on Penguin, and then a couple of months before it was due to be published, they switched it to a smaller publishing house, which meant that he wasn't going to get the same amount of publicity that he would have on Penguin. Still got good publicity. Was someone told him that they'd visited America and seen his book in a bookshop window in New York, the hardcover stacked up, in a big pile in the window. So they had a sort of display. So it did actually reach across the Atlantic. And I still see lots of people commenting on it, talking about what an effect it had on them. So I suppose what we'll do is we'll start with the preface for Total Man. So I've just got the book here. I'm just going to read from the book, so I'll be looking away, not that you can probably see me in the dark. And I think there are some people on YouTube. Maybe we've got some. I don't know how I get to YouTube. Hold on a minute. Give me a second. I just got to get YouTube up. A bit of COVID there. So look live. There's nothing in the live streams at the moment, so let me just see if I can click on the link. Right, okay. Oh yeah, okay. It is live. Right, hold on. You might hear me talking back when I just open up. There you go. You just heard me there. Oh, cool. D2017. Oh, cool. Audiobook. Yeah. That's good. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's start with the preface. Contact with colleagues and editors rapidly and rightly shatters every author's belief that his book speaks so clearly for itself that no introduction is necessary. He eventually comes to accept that a few words of preface are not merely advisable but essential. The book should be thought of, in first place, more as the scaffold which makes the building possible than the building itself, the outline or projection of a theory more than a finished theory. The genesis of this theory dates from my attempts as a psychology undergraduate 12 years ago to reconcile the approach of learning and conditioning theorists with, for instance, that of psychoanalysts. In the years which followed, my conclusions expanded to take in such fields of human activity as politics, art, religion, mythology, anthropology, and still others. Were the book then anything other than an outline, the 15 chapters would necessarily have become at least 15 volumes. I am myself only too aware of how much has been left unsaid and unconsidered. I have necessarily omitted important writers, some on the one hand who would be inimical to my position. It started already. Who would be inimical to my position, but equally others who would be supportive. Even where a writer is in fact considered, I can only be said to have sampled, not exhausted, his views. My deliberate policy throughout has been to stop short in the pursuance of any theme or argument whenever I felt a first case had been established, a sufficient brief to justify bringing the matter before the court, if not to make the result of the trial a foregone conclusion. Stan's writing in his early work is very intellectual. As his work goes on further, he starts appealing more to a bigger crowd, or to a more, moving further away from the establishment and further away from the intellectuals, which is a good thing. You don't want to be too intellectual with your work, because you'll never reach the majority of people because they're not intellectuals. But his work is also always quite accommodating of all types of learners and levels of language. I mean, Total Man's probably, I mean, it's a big book, so it's probably quite hard going for some people who aren't really used to reading. But if you get the paperback version, it seems smaller. The subject of the book is personality. This term is used in its broadest possible sense to refer to the totality of man's psychological, emotional, and intellectual life. As the word body includes a man's total physical characteristics, so the term personality should be understood here to embrace his entire psychological being. The coin of the book is generalization. In stating this, I hope I have disarmed those who would wish to use the fact as a criticism. One should hardly complain if the villages of England do not appear on a map of the world. Essentially, the view I have taken of other theories of personality, such as those of Marx, Christianity, Freud, Pavlov, Nietzsche, and many others, is not that all or all but one are wrong, but on the contrary, that all are correct. I was, and am still unable to escape the implications of the fact that each of the theorists in question was concerned with one and the same human being. Instead of rejecting all such views, I found myself essentially rejecting none. Pardon me. This shift of emphasis is, I believe, crucial. The task is therewith changed from one of selection to one of assembly. The arguments of the book are certainly speculative. No data has been considered too broad or too extreme to warrant exclusion on those grounds alone. Additionally, since all barriers between areas of study are of man's and only of man's making, I have dismantled these whenever it seemed useful to do so. Established or generally accepted facts, of course, also play a major part in the book, and I have throughout been at pains to distinguish between such fact and my own speculations. Specific reference to particular authorities is made where I felt doubt might arise as to the authenticity of the evidence cited, or where my own interpretation of an author's view alone might seem unduly biased. Occasionally, it has been necessary to draw on some learned sources not readily available to the general reader, but wherever possible I have deliberately given preference to popular accounts, literary works, magazine articles, encyclopedias, and so forth, not simply on the grounds of their availability, but because I believe that these more reflect the general mood in society than do narrowly professional or academic journals. Why, one might ask, am I concerned with the more general rather than the academic mood? So that's what I was saying. He does speak generally. That's his whole thing, is to try and break it down for people. The social scientist, erroneously, as I believe, has adopted many of the practices of the physical scientist on the implicit, often explicit, assumption that psychology and sociology are sciences. I myself, on the other hand, together with some other psychologists, consider the wholesale application of the methods of the physical sciences to the study of human behaviour to be amongst the major disasters of our time. This does not mean, however, that I believe those methods have no place at all in behavioural studies, though I have not space here to outline my precise position. The point I do wish to make, very briefly, a slightly different one, is this. Because of the fact that we ourselves are the objects of the psychologists' and sociologists' study, we cannot grant the psychologist the same automatic authority that we grant the professional physicist or chemist. Rather, the position resembles that which pertains in democracies in respect of parliament. The people elect representatives to govern them, individuals whom they consider particularly suited to do so, granting them by such election a mandate to run the affairs of the country as they think best. It is when a point is reached that government behaves in ways deeply unacceptable to the people that the mandate is withdrawn. This is quite pertinent. So it must be, I think, with the social sciences. We in a sense grant or have granted a mandate, but we do not thereby lose our inalienable right as human beings, the objects of the psychologist's study, to reject not merely his findings, but, if necessary, even his methods. My personal feeling, then, is that the focus of the psychological instrument has currently been adjusted to a level below that necessary for an adequate view of man to emerge. For example, I find present accounts of the human psyche and human society by social scientists, with rare exception, to be in almost every way inferior to those of the novelist, the poet, and the playwright. This is, of course, my personal view, but if matters are so, how might the position have arisen? The situation is best approached from the standpoint that psychology and sociology, whatever else they may be, and along with all the physical sciences, are themselves human behaviours. Objectivity itself is likewise not some property of the universe, but also only a human behaviour. We must not hesitate to study it and them as just that. Indeed, to take the position to its extreme, I suggest that the universe may profitably be regarded as a galactic Rorschach test, onto which we project and in which we perceive our own and only our own inner processes. Here one includes, as emphasized, the so-called objective processes. What we, then, with an odd pride at having apparently excluded ourselves from the equation, call the laws of the universe are at most the laws of our interaction with it. So, for example, while the universe manifests something termed wavelengths of light, it is itself no colour at all, not even black. One or two final comments can be made. If reactions obtained to the book while in manuscript are typical, it seems that it and the central arguments would have enjoyed a far less turbulent passage had I chosen to confine them to the areas of general psychology. Approval of my main conclusions at this level has been voiced by several authorities, amongst them Sir Cyril Burt. This statement, of course, in no sense necessarily implies the agreement of those authorities with any specific conclusion. I am extremely grateful to the people concerned for their generosity and encouragement, particularly in view of the fact that the book can hardly be said to flatter the image of the professional social scientist. However, my conclusions do not stop short at psychology. On the contrary, they have led and indeed forced me into far-reaching physiological speculations. It is here that criticism has been marked, and it must certainly go on record that the views I express are wholly novel, that is to say, are not currently envisaged by any professional physiologist. That, however, is not quite the same as saying that no hints towards my position exist in the professional literature. And I have quoted extensively from the writings of physiologists in support of my speculations. It remains to be seen how these will fare. With this, I have probably sufficiently prepared the ground for the book which follows. Its development will be found to be idiosyncratic, that is, it is selective towards its own ends. It asks of the reader, though not unreasonably, a willingness to follow a line of argument where the argument happens to lead. So that was the preface. I forgot to say, Total Man was actually Stan Gooch's thesis for his PhD, I believe. But it never got, he never ended up taking it through the education system. I think he just, he got a book deal and published it and didn't submit it for his final thesis. So we're going to go on to part one, which is the Restless Dead, and this part of part one is subtitled The Personality in Literature, Legend, Magic and Religion. Duality in Literature and Legend. It's got a Goethe quote from Faust. It's got the German here, but I'll read the English quote. Two spirits dwell within my breast. Each seeks therein its separate existence. And that's from Faust, part 1, 1808. In its barest outline, the Faust legend is that of a learned scholar who, in return for worldly pleasures and certain magical powers, sells his soul to the devil. There actually existed a relatively small-time, though not unintelligent, trickster named either Georgius or Johannes Faust. It is possible that two or more men of this name were involved. Numerous references to the surname are made by officials and clerics up and down 16th century Germany. Johannes Faust, at any rate, received the equivalent of a BA degree at Heidelberg University in 1509. In 1587, following the death of this individual or individuals, an anonymous author published a Faust biography in Frankfurt am Main. This was a not specially well-written and indeed speculative venture, which, far from giving a true picture of any real Faust, attributed to him all manner of far-fetched and scandalous activity, from folk anecdotes then in general circulation. Such stories, already centuries old, were regularly re-attributed to the magician, wizard or trickster of the moment. On this occasion, however, the label stuck, many of these elements thenceforth becoming the property of Faust and no other. They were dramatised by Marlowe in England, later by Goethe, and the permanent form of the legend was now established. This first known written version, the Volksbuch vom Dr. Faustus, travelled rapidly through Europe. It went to 18 editions in 10 years, appearing almost immediately in translation in England, France and Holland. It was one of these translations that Marlowe came upon. Versions of the Faust drama, which Marlowe wrote in 1604, were then performed regularly throughout Europe for the next 200 years. This was during the time of James I. So this is me talking. And so James I, the playwrights at the time were famous for writing what was known as masques. So I presume that Faust was some kind of a masquerade or some kind of play that was, taken around towns, like the same with Shakespeare. Shakespeare's plays were taken around towns and cities and performed. So back to the book. Later, the play continued its career in the puppet theatre. It was in this form that Goethe made its acquaintance at the end of the 18th century. It is already of interest that such a man, or men whose abilities in magic were well below those of many of their contemporaries, and whose scholarship was certainly inferior, one of whom, moreover, indulged in the most dastardly form of lewdness with the boys in his charge, should have been chosen, or at least have emerged as a composite representative figure of the age. Further, that a badly written book about this figure should have seized the public imagination. Third, that out of these two circumstances should have come a universal theme which from then on, as we shall see, occupies the attention of the major artistic talents of each succeeding generation. In more detail, the plot of Goethe's own version of the Faust story is as follows. An elderly scholar, realizing that life has passed him by and that his single-minded devotion to study has brought him no nearer any real knowledge, attempts to conjure up a devil. He meets with indifferent success, but is later visited by Mephistopheles, who in return for Faust's soul at death promises him youth, boundless pleasures, and time to find his ultimate answers. The devil is true to his word, except that Faust, for his part, discovers only fresh disillusion. In particular, he seduces a young girl, Gretchen, who, having borne his child out of wedlock, murders it and is executed for infanticide. The tragic Faust is carried away by Mephistopheles. Some only of those who both earlier and subsequently concerned themselves with the Faust story include Marlowe, the tragical history of Dr. Faustus, 1604, Lessing, Faust Fragmenta, 1784, Goethe, Faust Parts 1 and 2, 1808 and 1832, Berlioz, Damnation de Faust, 1846, Heine, Dr. Faust, eine Tanzpoem, 1851, Gounod, Faust, 1859, and Valéry Monfaust, 1946. Oh, and Thomas Mann, Dr. Faustus, 1947. One final recent example is the Richard Burton film of Dr. Faustus, 1968. There was also the film Bedazzled with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. That was probably 1969 or something. I doubt Stan would have known about that. But then that was remade later on with Liz Hurley and Brendan Fraser. And the theme of Faust is featured in loads of other stories as well. What Stan's actually saying is that, like, it's a universal, that they touched on a universal theme, and that repeated over the ages. English readers, less well acquainted than they might be with Goethe's work, may not appreciate that his talents were not confined to literature. He was a poet, writer, painter, impresario, educationalist, scientist, and statesman, the universal man. Some of his scientific contributions stand to the present day. He had completed a version of Faust Part 1 in 1775 when he was 26. Faust Part 2 was completed 57 years later in 1832, the year of his death. Work on the second part had occupied him throughout his life. If we are looking for some gauge of the significance of the myriad events which make up our lives and the weave of history, may we not do far worse than consider the themes which have continually engaged the attention of great artists of each generation? Such, indeed, is the starting point of this book. With this, we turn to a story which will be more familiar to English readers, that of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, published in 1886. If the change of level seems disconcerting, it may become less so. R.L. Stevenson's story concerns an elderly, brilliant physician, Dr. Jekyll, a man continually preoccupied with the question of good and evil, who undertakes a study of the dark side of the mind. He eventually distills a liquor which, when taken, releases a man's hidden personality, his dark self. Jekyll is himself the subject of his experiments. His alter ego, Mr. Hyde, is even a physically different personality. He's shorter, younger, coarser, with matted hair on the backs of his hands, a totally unbridled creature of uncontrollable anger and depraved appetites. Gradually, Hyde comes to assume control of Jekyll, even without the potion, and finally takes over almost completely. Among other incidents, he has perpetrated an atrocious murder, and on the point of being arrested with the last vestiges of conscious control, Jekyll commits suicide. In the somewhat better-known screen versions of this story, Jekyll is usually a young man, often with a fiancée, a pure girl whom he, as Hyde, forsakes for the company of prostitutes. The plot is melodramatic, and Stevenson was a prolific writer. Yet it was Jekyll and Hyde which established his reputation with the ordinary reader. In some ways, the story may seem a far remove from Goethe's Faust, but are not, for instance, the lines, "Two spirits dwell within my breast, each seeks therein its separate existence," still more applicable to Jekyll than to Faust? Yeah. Whether he put any actual credence in the matter or not, Goethe felt at least artistically obliged to externalize the devil as a separate character. Stevenson's devil is wholly internalized, a difference we may choose to consider significant. Jekyll and Hyde has been called one of the screen's most popular themes. It's true. There's literally every decade there's a Jekyll and Hyde film comes out. Some sort of, takes the potion. Wasn't there like even some sort of Eddie Murphy one or something? Or I don't know. There's all sorts. There's comedy versions. Anyway, back to the book. Jekyll and Hyde has been called one of the screen's most popular themes. At least 17 films have been based on the story. The first film version was made in 1908. The most recent, apparently, in 1963. So this book was written in 72. So there are more recent versions of Jekyll and Hyde. The theme has inspired some great screen performances by such actors as John Barrymore, Conrad Veidt, Spencer Tracy, Boris Karloff, Paul Massey, and Frederick March, who received an Academy Award for the role. Because it's 1972 and Stan was 32, 72. Stan was 40 years old when he wrote this book. So some of the references are probably going to be Mr. Burns type references, where they're going to be sort of from a bygone era, where you're going to not know a lot of the references. So I'm going to, as I read through, I'm going to try and sort of like think of more contemporary ones that we can update it with. In the events surrounding Jekyll and Hyde, do we not see in miniature and over a shorter time span something of the circumstances of the Faust story? The parallels go further. Just as elements in Marlowe's Faustus were quickly expanded to produce popular stage versions at the level of knockabout farce, so we shortly find knockabout versions of Stevenson's theme involving Abbott and Costello, Jerry Lewis, Bernard Bresslaw, and others. There is even what might be called a puppet version played by Sylvester the cartoon cat. The evolution of these themes from tragic to comic is not so much one of debasement, but rather one of acceptance. This is a feature of importance that will be considered again. From the dual vantage point of Faust and Dr. Jekyll, we are in fact in touch with an extensive continuum of legend and folklore in existence for hundreds, in fact thousands of years. The form changes from time to time, and the similarities are not always obvious at first sight. As a next step, some of the further forms of this major theme are now reviewed and the interconnections between versions indicated. Central to the theme is a state of possession, which may be internal or external, though the distinction is in any case not absolute. While Jekyll was internally possessed, Faust is seen more as controlled by an external agency. In all cases, however, the person is somehow taken over by some other intelligence or force. This takeover may be with or without his permission and may have the apparently paradoxical effect of either increasing or diminishing his powers. What always suffers in one way or other is freedom of action. Internal possession occurs in a variety of forms: the frenzy of witch doctors or medicine men, the tongues of fire which filled Christ's disciples, the trance of the spiritualist medium, in sleepwalking, epilepsy, and actual madness. At the other end of this scale comes the zombie of Haiti. Here, the individual has abdicated his own volition, his own body, to the point of being dead, although he is in fact only sometimes described as dead. At other times, it is said that the conjure man has stolen the living man's soul. In whichever event, the practitioner here has fully taken charge of the other person's body and uses it entirely for his own ends. The hypnotist, too, exercises a similar, though perhaps more limited, power. From the zombie, it is only a short, if perhaps unexpected, jump to the puppet. The puppet and the zombie also represent the most extreme forms of external possession. The puppet literally has no life of its own, except that imparted by its master, or so it would seem. In innumerable forms, the puppet has figured centrally, and in many areas still figures in the religious rituals and entertainment of all races. The statement holds as true for classical Greece as for India, China, Mexico, and ancient Egypt. Puppet theatres flourished not merely in rural areas, but in urban areas where there was no shortage of human entertainers, and in countries where it was no disgrace to be an actor. The art, as we know, was practiced in Goethe's day. As for antiquity, complete puppet theatres have been found in Egyptian tombs, and single puppets are regularly found with the dead throughout the ancient world. There are perhaps grounds for suggesting that man's interest in puppets is greater than can solely be accounted for in rational terms. Okay. Consider a moment the ventriloquist and the ventriloquist dummy. Is our sole interest in the fact that the ventriloquist speaks without moving his lips? Or is our interest rather with this strange creature which is alive and not alive, which in some ways is more limited, yet in other ways less limited than a human being, which in a way is under our control and does what we tell it, but which in another sense does things against our will and has an almost macabre life of its own? Probably the best known of the possessors of recent times is Count Dracula, from the novel by Bram Stoker. Of it, a commentator writes, "This strange tale of vampires and werewolves has worn surprisingly well. It has been presented on the stage, and its principal character, Dracula, has become a well-known figure of literary reference. Surprisingly, perhaps, the tale was written as recently as 1897. 14 film versions have been made, showing that again the situation of the Faustbock and Dr. Jekyll has recurred, a rather far-fetched melodramatic idea incorporated in an apparently one-shot story does not merely survive, but continues to extend its influence. The basis of the Dracula story is that certain individuals, when dead, are not truly dead. By night, they come to life and search out living victims whose blood they drink. Those so bitten eventually die and become vampires themselves. By day, the vampire sleeps in a coffin or box, which must contain soil from his native land. One of the few ways of destroying a vampire is to drive a stake through his heart during this period. Of interest for our purpose is the increase in the vampire's body hair, and the fact not so much that he comes to life by night as that he sleeps all day." So the vampire, what we're gonna try and remember here is that vampires increase their body hair and they have to sleep all day. They only come out at night. At this point in time, Stan hadn't really developed fully his theory of the hybrid origin theory. So this is literally him playing around with those ideas that lead towards it. Ralph Hexham in the chat on YouTube is saying Punch and Judy. Yeah, exactly, Punch and Judy, puppets. Vampirism is a local European variant of a worldwide phenomenon, lycanthropy. This term, from Greek lykos, a wolf, is today applied to a psychiatric disorder in which the patient imagines himself to be an animal. We call that furries now. Is that? So it was actually a psychiatric disorder, but now they've unleashed furries on the world. Anyway, the belief that all men could and that certain men did become animals is universal and dates from prehistoric times. The trail from vampires and werewolves lead naturally to the hordes of demons, wraiths and spectres which jostle for elbow room in the world's folklore. These were waiting in all kinds of places to spring upon the unwary human being given half a chance. Apocryphal writings, in particular the Book of Enoch, state that demons are the offspring of unions between fallen angels and human mothers. The fallen angels themselves are devils and include the devil himself. One recalls that the crimes of the fallen angels were self-assertion and the wrongful revelation of divine secrets. In this connection, one notes too that sorcerers like Faust conjured up devils to gain knowledge and revelation rather than to pave the way to a life of depravity. Angels as such are significant for several reasons. First, though, often mentioned in the Old Testament, they come into their own principally in the New Testament. Second, they have human form and are either masculine or sexless, female angels making their appearance only with the Renaissance. Third, angels come from above, not from below. Important. Fourth, Greek agelos means a messenger. At a later stage, from one or two remarks by Christ, the idea is evolved that each human being has his own guardian angel. This notion becomes confused with the belief that human beings have a detachable soul, which is an exact counterpart of themselves. This spiritual self could separate from the material self and wander abroad, the so-called doppelganger. It was death to meet your own doppelganger. Norwegian folklore has a similar figure in the follower. This Scandinavian manifestation often took the form of an animal having the characteristics of the person concerned. Thus, this myth in turn links back to werewolves. Further echoes are found in the belief of the ancient Egyptians, for example, that every living thing, men, animals, plants, had two forms, the visible individual and an invisible double or second self. So, in connection with this, the word twin, the etymology of the word twin is duen or dwin, or it's an Indo-European word, and the word duo in Italian comes from the same word, the same root. Dos, obviously Spanish. Two, the word two, the English word two, is the same root as twin. And then you've got in Spain, I believe it's the duende is a spirit, like a sort of it's the spirit that possesses you when you dance, the duende in Spain. And then you've got the jinn in the Arabic countries, or in Islamic literature. So all these words are all the same root: due, dua, duo, dua, twin, tua, tu. And then you've got jinn. Obviously, you've got this weird D-J-I-N-N. So with the rest of the words, you've got du, duo, or tua, T-W. So you've got this strange pronunciation at the beginning of the word. So yin, dua, tu, twin, duen. They're all similar. And then you've got in relation to that is Corduen. So Corduen is the original name of Kurdistan, and so Corduen. So we know the word core means the center of something, or the core, the heart of something, the core of something. In French, cœur is heart. So Corduen, Kurdistan was in folklore, Kurdistan was where the demons that Solomon captured in his ring, because Solomon had a ring that would capture demons, and he used these demons to build the temple, the Solomon's temple. And so he sent out these demons, the demons that he captured in his ring, and he asked them to go around Europe and collect the most beautiful women from all the different countries. And then when the demons brought the beautiful women back to Solomon, he had died, so they didn't have anywhere to put these women, so they put them all in Kurdistan, and that's why it's called Corduen, the language originally, the place originally. So my personal take on that is that Corduen is the core of the duende, the core of the jinn, basically, and that's where they took all the women. And Corduen, you've probably heard of it from what's the Gordian knot? Yeah, so when they say cutting the Gordian knot, I think that's maybe Alexander or someone like that who has to cut a Gordian knot or something, or untie a Gordian knot. So the Gordian knot was Corduen. So that's the place that Gordian is Corduen, which is Kurdistan. So it's all that same area. Anyway, that's my little addition. So we go back to the book. So we said about the Egyptians had two forms: the visible individual and an invisible double or second self. Also, the genius. Sorry to distract again, but a genius in Greek is the same root as the word genie. So the English word genie came from genius because they didn't know what else to call these jinn. The jinn in the Middle East were described to the English, and the English didn't have a word to describe jinn, so they took the Greek word genius. But the Greek the Greek concept of the genius is that everybody's born with a detached spirit to them, and that's their genius. And so your genius is a second body that floats around beside you. In connection with the general theme of possession and the concept of the doppelganger, one cannot escape the link also with the god Amphitryon. In this story, Zeus, chief of the gods, is consumed with a passion for the mortal Alcmene, wife of Amphitryon. While Amphitryon is away at war, Zeus changes himself into a double of the husband, the only way he can seduce the virtuous wife. With this story, we come to still another of the perennial legends. The earliest extant literary treatment of the theme is the comedy by Plautus, who died in 185 BC. This, however, appears to be based on still older plays. The basic plot has come to be one of the most frequently treated in world comedy. Like Faust, it has caught the attention of outstanding talents. Specifically, one has Molière's Amphitryon, 1668, H. von Kleist's Amphitryon in 1806, and Jean Girardou's Amphitryon 38 from 1926. The number 38 being a joking reference to the many earlier versions of the play. And more obliquely, Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. The subplot of, for instance, Kleist's drama is equally significant in the present context. Here, Mercury, the servant of Zeus, impersonates Amphitryon's servant Sosia and appears to the servant as himself. In progressing from the puppet to Dracula and beyond, we branched away from another road which leads to the mechanical doll. There is first the isolated but significant tale of Pinocchio, the puppet who by an act of moral courage earns the right to become a real boy. The main route takes us onto the wind-up or clockwork doll. So remember, 1972, well before we had like AI and all the rest of it. So just where it says clockwork doll or puppet, you could theoretically replace that with artificial intelligence, AI, robotics, whatever you want. The main route takes us onto the wind-up or clockwork doll. Such figures are the subject, for instance, of Delibes' Coppelia from 1870, Stravinsky's Petruchka, 1911, and Rossini's La Boutique Fantastique, 1919. Oh, sorry, La Boutique Fantasque. In Coppelia, a real girl substitutes herself for the life-size mechanical doll which the toy maker has made and creates havoc in the shop. In Rossini's similar ballet, a large number of mechanical figures come to life of their own volition and run wild when the shop is shut for the night. The theme of toys which come to life at night is very frequently found in children's tales. Batteries not included. Allied here also is the story written astonishingly over 150 years ago by Mary Shelley of the man-made monster Frankenstein. The toys which come to life of their own accord are daunting enough. Worse still is the creation of our mind, which becomes entirely independent of us and is moreover almost totally destructive. With Frankenstein, the macabre as opposed to the amusing elements are explicit. In the sense of an escape from control, however, all these stories are linked. Essentially, this is the process too of Jekyll and Hyde. Apart from their fascination for the artistic imagination, a consideration we shall ultimately return to, the main element which unites all the diverse materials so far reviewed is two-ness. There is one thing and something else, a possessor and a possessed. We must temporarily delay facing the question of precisely what or who is possessing whom or what. So far, there are three possibilities. 1, a human being is externally possessed. 2, a human being is internally possessed. 3, a human being is himself the external possessor, as with the puppet master, the toy maker, and the monster maker. or the AI robot maker. In this third case, however, the situation is inherently unstable. Remember that. Just remember that when people talk about humans creating life or robots or sentient beings or any of the rest of the bullshit they think that their hubris leads them to think they can do. Very soon the tables are wholly or partly turned, and the puppet master finds himself dancing to his own creation. This fact highlights the absence in this literature of the fourth possibility, namely the human being as internal possessor. This is the transcendent version, is that you're possessing yourself. This is a feasible but for some reason neglected alternative. May one ask whether what is really being dealt with, what is really feared, is being possessed? Even this question stops short of the truth. Is not the real fear the possibility that the possessor is always within us and somehow is not us? The almost ludicrous question which is posed is, are we each two creatures? Are we each ourselves and a doppelganger? And if this is true, is the other then a friend or an enemy? And worse still, which of the two is the senior? Are we the real householder in this our house, or are we the upstart, the lodger, the unwelcome guest, who may at any moment be turned out of his estates? To lower the temperature at this point, though still vigorous as we have seen, the themes and situations we have examined all somehow undeniably bear the stamp of the past. Whatever may or may not be the real issues hidden in the material cited, and certainly its wide, if former provenance appears to demand some kind of explanation, are we nevertheless perhaps looking only at a historical phenomenon? Or may we perhaps find these issues as vigorous as ever elsewhere in a slightly different guise? Were that to be so, would there not then be a situation very much requiring an explanation? The more so perhaps because so patently neglected in any current were that to be so, would there not then be a situation very much requiring an explanation? The more so perhaps because so patently neglected in any current writings on mankind? Just scroll down here. Sorry. Okay. 1 second, everyone. 1 second. Okay. Oh, I didn't see there was more chats there. Sorry. Okay. Golden Compass. And then, wow, did you say they had the concept of clockwork dolls in 972? I think what I was saying is that in 1972, when Stan wrote this book, he wasn't really aware there was going to be some kind of AI, so he just refers to it as clockwork dolls. But you can see clockwork toys from the Greek times. They definitely had clockwork-ish toys or dolls back then, or something that was clockwork. Okay, so in search of some present position, we turn now to a consideration of a 20th century phenomenon, science fiction. Attention need hardly be drawn to the rapid growth of this literary genre in the years since the war, at which point it went public following a period of underground growth. One saw then the appearance of the SF novel in the bestseller lists. For example, John Wyndham's The Day of the Triffids, 1951. The effective capture by SF not merely of the way out, but of the average adult mind is perhaps best seen today in the emergence of the big-budget science fiction film for adults, Kubrick's 2001, Vadim's Barbarella, and so on. let us consider a few themes from current science fiction writing. A party of scientists, one. So this is a few themes from current science fiction writing that Gooch had noticed at the time. 1. A party of scientists arrives from outer space. They examine Earth's ecology, operate on the brains of some anthropoid apes and depart, leaving the changed apes to evolve into Homo sapiens. 2. Another version with a grimmer twist. A party of outer space scientists arrive on Earth, ostensibly to observe anthropoid apes. One of the group, a sociologist, is vaguely puzzled by his inclusion in the party. During the night, he is drugged. He awakes to find himself in the body of an ape, the victim of a brain transplant. The spaceship takes off as the tragic ape man turns to his stinking companions and begins teaching them to build huts. 3. A family of short, incredibly ugly, immensely strong, smelly, magical, mystical, creative and imaginative hillbilly junk merchants prove to be the last survivors and direct descendants of Neanderthal man who preceded and were destroyed by Homo sapiens. 4. A party of space explorers crashes and they are obliged to make their lives on Earth. Fairly rapid degeneration sets in over a few generations with the resultant loss of skills and knowledge. In the course of many generations, the upward climb to civilization begins again, leading to present-day man with his dim memories of wheels in the sky, chariots of fire, forgotten magical powers, and a yearning to return to space. 5. The first space astronaut finds on leaving Earth's gravity that his mind has been released from a prison. All the mental powers mankind has dreamed of and tried to grasp, telepathy, telekinesis, true understanding, creativity, are suddenly his. An earthbound, non-physical parasite which preys on every human being from birth has been forced to abandon its parasitic grip at the entry to free space. Wow. 6. Parents find themselves unable to have any more children, and the present generation of children ceases physical growth. Man proves to be the primitive, larval stage of a higher life form, which now abandons Earth. Reading these outlines, some may have experienced for the first time the charge or sense of exhilaration which many science fiction readers obtain from the genre. This is perhaps the same sensation described by Goethe in his autobiography on first seeing the Faust puppet play. The significant puppet fable re-echoed and hummed in many tones in my head. It is possible also that the original listeners to Greek legends experienced this same excitement, a sense of this is where it's at. While some of the further details of the content of these outlines must be left for us. Sorry, we're now at 6. That was the end of 6. Yes, the end of 6 was the larval stage of a higher life form which abandons Earth. So that was number 6. And now we've moved on to the next paragraph. While some of the further details of the content of these outlines must be left for a later stage, in terms of the similarities between the old and the new material, one notes again the clear and persisting emphasis on two-ness. Significantly, we have now for the first time the human being as internal possessor. This we see in the first outline, but more clearly in the second and fourth. A human being, instead of being overwhelmed by some alien force or agency, finds himself rooted in some undesirable, basically captive position, where nonetheless he is in a limited sense master. A similar theme is seen in the third outline, where man is shown as a displacer, a pusher aside of what has gone before. In 5 and 6, he is an escaper from the undesirable or lowly captive situation. The last two outlines are, perhaps, less real or poignant, and the escapes contain an element of wish fulfillment. Of the dissimilarities between the old and new material, one for the moment is emphasized. Whereas the older material looks mainly backwards and inwards, the recent material, sci-fi, looks forward and outwards. In a sense, also these two divisions look respectively downwards into graves, dungeons, or whatever, and upwards into the sky and outer space. In those terms, angels would not be the last of the vampires, but the first of the spacemen. These science fiction themes, and many others besides them, represent the new, vigorous growth of the 20th century. It is of significance that this growth takes place not in some overlooked corner as a kind of lunatic fringe, but nearer than ever to the nerve centre of the scientific establishment. At this point, we can perhaps look again, rather more seriously, at the earlier forms of these absurdly persistent ideas. And just have a quick check. I'll just quickly check the chat. Hold on. Ralph Hexham, no, we are at 6. He means, no, I meant our real life society is at 6. No more human babies, hybrids to come. Okay, yeah, okay, I get it. That's true. The Only Way Out is In has asked, I wonder what he'd have said about the Forbidden Planet theme of the captive or repressed feminine. Yeah. I think that's what he's getting at, is that in all of these situations there's a duality involved, and that duality is about something being repressed or captured and then being released. So in a way, Forbidden Planet is like it's the fourth. I'd say it fits in with the outlines for the earlier. It's the human being as internal possessor, because the feminine is being is trying to break out. Oh, and also Ralph Hexham, isn't Forbidden Planet based on Edward de Vere's Tempest? Oh, I'm glad someone else knows the real Shakespeare. That's good. I like that. I go for Bacon myself. Okay, so 2. We turn then to a more detailed examination of the older material, with a view to isolating some of the less immediately obvious aspects of the major theme, which are really sub-themes in their own right. Sorry, I'm just checking how much more we've got left, because I might actually say, because this is actually part 2 of the first part of the Restless Dead. So I might just stop there then, and because I don't want to make these too long, so I think like an hour. What we've been an hour and 12 minutes. That was an hour and 12 minutes with me talking crap at the beginning, like an introduction thing. So. Yeah, maybe what we'll do there is just hold it there. So he has got some footnotes as well, where he mentions space permits the mention of only a few. So older themes into this was to do with that sci-fi is always about the scientific establishment, because that's what he's hinting at there, is that's the part of civilization or society that needs to sort of take a serious look at itself. Is science is the scientific establishment, which is why science fiction is so close to science. Because those are the people with they're the ones with the problem in the modern world. But he says here that older themes, incidentally, are meantime not neglected. Space permits the mention of only very few examples. In respect of possession in the old sense, one would cite Nigel Neal's Quatermass serial, the already mentioned Dad the Triffids, and John Christopher's The Possessors. The BBC's Doctor Who, now in its 7th year, an endless belt of variation. This was now in its 7th year. Wow. That was 1972. An endless belt of variations on the possession theme, itself producing the Dalek fever, which gripped the nation's children, and Richard Matheson's disconcerting reversal of the vampire theme, I Am Legend, and Walter Miller's revival of the good-evil spiritual temporal conflict in A Canticle for Leibowitz. Yeah. So I hope that's a good little taster of what's coming in the book. Probably called D 2017. I'd say in the chat says awesome, good stuff. Thank you. That's good. I'm glad you appreciate a bit of live read. So yeah, hopefully. I mean, it's a big book, but hopefully I can stick to it if I haven't got any other plans on Mondays. And we can go through the whole thing, and then obviously these are still up forever until the channel gets pulled down. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Oh, The Only Way Out is in. That was cool. Thank you, Ralph Hexam. Yes, good start. Thanks, guys. So I'll probably try and announce it next time so that you know it's going on. But it's going to be Mondays round about 8:30, something like that, 8:30 till 9:30. We'll make it a date, and then I'll see you back here again at that time. Okay, so it's also I'm streaming it on D Live as well as YouTube. So if you don't want to, if you don't want to support YouTube, I can understand that. That's very good. Then you can always go to D Live, and then perhaps what I'll do is I'll also put them up on. I'll buy The Only Way Out is in. So what I'll do is I'll probably put them on Odyssey or something as well, so that people can see them there. I'm not sure. Can you live stream on Odyssey? Does anyone know? I'll have a look into that anyway. I shouldn't be asking you lot. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Ralph. So yeah, I'll see you all next week.